Hey, maybe just don't trespass. Leave the creepy abandoned hospital alone. There's got to be a better way to make YouTube content. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's going to give you a pretty good sense of what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus, which, in short, is we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is our Is It Syllabus-Worthy series. This is where I take recommendations from you guys, horror movie suggestions that you make in the comments to one of my videos that I've never seen before, and I watch it for the very first time going in blind, and then I let you know, is it syllabus worthy? Is it something that I think is worthy of being on the horror movie syllabus? And today, the movie that we're looking at is Night Shot. And Night Shot was recommended to us by Paula G. White, and she recommended this a while ago in our found footage video, and I'm just getting to it now, in part because it's kind of hard to find, but we'll get more into that later. But Paula didn't give me a whole lot to go on. I knew it was found footage because of where she had recommended it, and she told me that it was a French film so that I could expect subtitles, and she also described the ending as epic. And we'll come back to that also, but I went into this knowing just what Paula had told me, and that was it. And well, did I like it? Did I hate it? Let's find out. Like I said, the movie that we're looking at today is Night Shot. Night Shot came out in 2018 and was written and directed by Hugo Koenig. And I'm not really terribly familiar with Hugo's work. I looked him up, didn't really recognize anything else on there, but did notice that he plays a character in this movie. He plays the cameraman who doesn't, he's never seen in the movie, but you can actually hear him talking in there, and he's filming everything. And that's kind of key because of the way this movie is shot is really a big reason of why I would say it's noteworthy, but we're going to get into that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie follows 2 French urban explorers as they sneak into an abandoned hospital in order to make a video, a content creation for their YouTube channel or their social media. And it's told completely from their perspective through the camera that they're filming with, uncut. They never stop recording. And they explore this hospital that has a really crazy and mysterious and spooky backstory. And they're trying to do kind of like a ghost hunter type thing. But of course, strange things start to happen and hijinks start to abound. And we're going to go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. But the strength of this movie right out the gate is this concept. And I don't mean found footage concept of exploring an abandoned hospital, because we've seen that plenty of times. Where the real gimmick that really elevates this is it's the real-time, no-cut idea that they're doing this all in one take. No stopping. And as far as I can tell, they actually did. Like, if they hid the cuts in this movie, they hid them really well, because it seems like they filmed this all in one take. And that's really a strong gimmick. And I use the word gimmick. I think gimmick kind of has a pejorative sense to it. I don't mean it pejoratively here at all. It is kind of something that sets it apart, and it is kind of a fun trick that in theory isn't really necessary, like doing long one takes or a whole movie that's like one take. We've seen other movies do this, and a lot of times it looks, or the purpose of it feels like it's just kind of a gimmick. Looking at you, 1917. But it is, in this case, a real enhancement to the found footage subgenre, because it avoids a lot of the found footage tropes. When we have found footage, we have this footage that's presumably people were filming, and then, something bad happened to them or whatever. And a lot of times you'll see them, the filmmakers, the real filmmakers, do things like fail to give a reason why somebody would still be filming at this time, or they'd add music to it inexplicably, or just the editing alone is kind of odd and suspect. Like, why is it edited like this? By having this all in one take with no music or anything like that, literally just the guy filming while he's filming, it sidesteps a lot of those tropes, those found footage tropes that often take me out of the verisimilitude of the story. This feels very, very realistic. It's dark. It's not always really well lit. It's shot in black and white, and it's basically the light mostly from the camera itself that's lighting things. And it's got this really wild, like, location that is pretty pretty impressive, frankly. It's an old abandoned hospital, and it's got multiple layers and tons of rooms, tons of doors. And every time you open a door, you're a little bit nervous what you're going to find behind it. And it's got all this graffiti everywhere that is honestly a little aggressive. It almost feels like set design graffiti. Is so much of it, and it's covering like every inch of every wall of everything. And I think that actually winds up adding to something later on when the pair get lost, because you're starting to wonder, have I seen this graffiti before or not? You, the viewer, are wondering that. So they've got this really cool location, and they're leveraging it really well because you can only see so much of it at a time because you're literally seeing through the eyes of your protagonist. And the protagonists are believable. They're trying to do a YouTube show. They're up and peppy. They're giving you a lot of exposition for their show right up front, which is telling you the backstory of the hospital. And it's, arguably would be clunky exposition, kind of obvious, except that they're filming a web show. So it makes sense they'd be telling their audience this background, right? And they're doing this whole exploring thing where they're searching everything, just kind of, looking for ghosts and all the creepy stuff that happened here. And it all feels like very realistic content creation. It feels like something that people would make. They'd find a really creepy location, they'd go and do this. And they've got solid actors. Again, Hugo is the director, but he's also acting as the cameraman, and you hear his voice, and he's talking to the lead woman, Natalie, who is really good here because she's convincing. She's very peppy and up, and then of course as the movie goes on, things start to degrade and get a little bit weird, but she's likable, and their dynamic is pretty good. They're not annoying, and more on that in a little bit. And they're able to carry this movie for 90 minutes without stopping. And again, that's the key to this movie. It doesn't stop. The camera never stops rolling. They say early on, don't stop rolling, and they don't, which again explains why the characters are still filming the entire time, even when it doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course, their light is the camera light, which also makes some sense. So they've got a lot of stuff to set up to avoid the found footage tropes and to like really lean into the realism of this, for better and for worse. Because when you get started, the movie is, setting up this ghost hunting thing, and like most ghost hunter shows, not a lot's happening. It takes like 40 minutes before the Ouija board shows up. And like after that, it really does pick up quite a bit. But for that first 40 minutes or so, you're getting a lot of lore, you're getting a lot of backstory, but you're not getting a lot of action. It's slow. It's really slow. And this is a common criticism of the movie, is that the pacing's a little off and it's a little slow. But again, the slowness kind of is a problem as a viewer, but realistic. If this is really found footage, it wouldn't be like, every, 8 minutes an action beat's going to happen. That wouldn't happen, right? So it makes sense that this slowness like just kind of adds to the realism. But again, that can be a little bit of a drawback from a filmmaking or film watching perspective. But they are really leveraging their location. And then, like I said, after about 40 minutes or so, when they find the Ouija board and then things start to really pick up, things get really, really good. This is where the tension starts to pick up and kick in, because I'll be honest, up until that point, the plot, the story is a little weak. Again, it's slow, and that's the biggest weakness of this movie. Okay, let's just kind of cut to the chase there. The story of this is its biggest weakness. It's got the found footage style down pat, possibly some of the best I've ever seen, but the story is a little, thin, frankly. And then we'll get to the end in a minute or two here. But the whole thing does feel kind of reminiscent of the Blair Witch Project. Right? Like they're not making a documentary, but they're making content. And, the woman is kind of giving little speeches to explain what happened in certain places for that. It feels very Heather Donahue from Blair Witch, right? But the difference is these two characters, by and large, get along just fine. They are perfectly fine with each other, and they don't have that built-in tension or abrasiveness of the Blair Witch couple of people that are like kind of get on each other's nerves. And part of that's because, again, it's only 90 minutes. Whereas Blair Witch was edited out, and it takes place over several days, and people's nerves start to get frayed, and they start to deteriorate, and they start to argue and bicker with each other. That doesn't really happen here, which, again, a lot of people might think that is a benefit because these people are likable, whereas they found the Blair Witch characters to be annoying, and these characters aren't as annoying. But as a result, you don't have that fighting, you don't have that tension. You don't have that ratcheting up fear and anxiety that just kind of like and grating on each other and everything. That you don't get that. The tension doesn't kick in till halfway through the movie. And again, this makes sense. It's realistic because there wouldn't be any reason to fight because you've only been there for 45 minutes or whatever. So it does, in a realism sense, work. But from a movie standpoint, it takes a while before there to be any tension. About halfway through, after they find the Ouija board and everything like that, they start to realize they might be lost. And that's where things really pick up pace a lot, and the movie gets much better. And this is where the location really pays off. This is where that graffiti I was talking about really pays off, because you start studying it going, have they been down this hallway before? I'm not sure. They're not sure, and you're not sure either. You have lost your sense of direction just like they have, which is important because you kind of have to give the movie its premise, right? They're in a really large facility, and it's dark. And so you can kind of believe that they'd get lost a bit, but they are able to see outside. And so you kind of have to give it the premise that they are trapped, that they can't get out. You know, there's some choices here with the camera that you have to kind of suspend your disbelief for a little bit, and it starts to slide a little into found footage tropesy stuff, right? There's, you know, how where maybe they could jump their way out one of the windows, and the guy's like, oh, I have vertigo and I don't want to go, and I don't want to mess with my camera. And early on, you'll buy that, but after a little while, you're like, you know what, man? Probably stop worrying about the camera. You know, it's going to challenge you a little bit, or you're just going to have to kind of give it its, you know, like I said, give it its premise, like let it go a little bit that they can't get out of the hospital as easily as you think they could. If you can give it that, then this works really, really well, because the whole point of them being lost, it really starts to work. They start having these situations where like the sound mutes out, and it's not really explained why. There's not a whole lot of explanation here, which is why I think the story is a little bit of an issue. But the visuals kick in really good here because you're seeing everything. You can't quite hear anything. The sound design works in this movie. It's really, really good. And there is a moment where it's black and white or night vision for pretty much the entire movie, except for one little part where they switch to color so they can see the blood that's on the floor. And it's great. And it did make me wonder if the whole movie being in color might have been a better call. It might have been harder for them to achieve the same cool shadows and darkness that works so well in the movie if it was in color, but the graffiti stuff would have popped more though. So it's kind of a trade-off. I kind of would have liked to have seen what it looks like completely in color rather than the black and white. But again, this works out really well, and the black and white reminiscent of Blair Witch, and I think they're really trying to go for that. And for the most part, it's working pretty well. Now, here's the thing. Again, I harped on the story, and there's a reason for it. The ending is, I'll call it unsatisfying, because that's what a lot of people, that seems to be the general consensus of reviews. And there's not a lot of reviews, and there's not a whole lot of pedigree for this movie. We'll get to that in a little while. But the common critique seems to be that the ending slides into a found footage trope and is kind of abrupt and unearned, and just kind of weird or unsatisfying is the word I like to use there. And Paula said it was epic. And from the tone, it seemed like she was saying it was awesome. And maybe she thinks it is. Maybe there are some people that think it is. That's not the general consensus, and it's not mine. The ending, compared to everything that comes before it style-wise in terms of found footage and how well they made this feel realistic, the ending felt not as bad as so many other found footage movies. It didn't feel quite as trite as that, but it didn't really escape that trope either of how the movies just kind of abruptly end, and y'all know what I'm talking about. That happens here too. It's maybe a little bit better than that, than the average one. I'll say that. I'll give it that. But for the most part, left me a little cold for how well that they had set up this idea of the uncut one take thing and all the realistic hints and touches that they put into this movie. To see it end the way it ended felt, I don't know, just unsatisfying is the word I keep coming back to. And narratively, I guess it's kind of earned, I guess. I don't know. That's the thing. The story doesn't really feel like it matters. This is very much a style over substance movie. And the style is great. And the substance is really thin. So where do we land on that? What does that mean? Does it mean it's syllabus worthy? Well, let's find out. So, is Night Shot syllabus worthy? No, it just misses it for me. It just misses it for me. The format that they've chosen and the realistic style that they've presented almost wins out on this. But that story is so thin, and it gets so incomprehensible at some point that it just keeps it from making the cut. It really does make it fall short. It's interesting because from a technical perspective, the work being done here is largely great because it feels rather real. Now, one of the catches to that is there are subtitles because it's French, right? Now, Paula said in her comment that you kind of start to like forget about the subtitles for a while, and you kind of maybe don't even need them that much because you can kind of figure out what's going on. True on both counts, but the subtitles did undercut the realism of the found footage trope for me a little bit. It did. But setting that aside, because that's on me, I don't speak French. If I spoke French, I wouldn't need to have the subtitles, right? It's really doing this great job of making it feel like truly found footage. But that is its biggest strength, but also one of its biggest shortcomings, because without having the cuts, you can't show the lapse of time to see these people being lost for a really long period of time and start to really kind of break down. The breakdowns happen a little bit abruptly. And some of the other realistic things here, there's lack of tension early on because nothing's happening yet, really. There's no reason for them to be scared yet. So again, realistic, but from a viewer standpoint, when the hell is something going to happen? So it does undercut that quite a bit. It's a weird thing where its biggest strength is also one of its biggest weaknesses or shortcomings. And not for nothing, this movie doesn't have a tremendous pedigree. I mentioned this earlier. It's not the easiest movie to find. It took me a while to get a copy of this, thanks to my friend Sarah, found it, but it took a little while to find it, and it wasn't even the best copy necessarily, so it's not the easiest thing to track down. So when I recommend it, it's hard to even tell you to check it out because it's going to be hard to find, at least a little bit hard to find. And it doesn't have a Wikipedia page. There's not a Rotten Tomatoes score for it. Letterboxd has some reviews on it, and I told you the big harp on it is that it's got a disappointing ending. So it doesn't really have a big cultural impact on horror, but it is an excellent example of found footage, and that would be the right subgenre for it. And Paul is right on this. It's a found footage movie. That's what it would be. I wouldn't even want to try to put it in another subgenre because it is just like a template of how a found footage movie should be made in terms of trying to make sure it seems realistic and avoiding all those tropes. It really crushes it there. But again, as a result, now you kind of made me understand why other found footage movies don't do this, is because it can make it for a little bit of a slog of a watch. But honestly, I think a little bit of a tighter script, a little bit of a more interesting story, or maybe just something a little bit more spooky might have done the trick. I hate not putting this one on the syllabus because it's made so well. But I just I found myself checking out a little bit every now and then. So I have to say it can't be the greatest, especially because in the found footage subgenre there's bangers. There's too many good ones in there, so it's not going to fight its way through. So that's my thoughts on Night Shot. I do definitely recommend it just so you can see how well made it is in terms of trying to be realistic in its found footage stuff and how it managed to avoid so many found footage tropes that people complain about, like people like me complain about all the time. Did a really good job of that here. So definitely give it some time to check out if you can find it, which again, not the easiest thing to do, but the easy thing to do right now is to check out a Horror Trivia Pursuit card. So it's that time of the video where I read a card live on camera, Horror Trivia Pursuit, try to answer it, and hopefully get it right and not embarrass myself. And since Night Shot is a French movie, let's do the international category on the card, okay? And here's our question. What 1960 Italian film was an adaptation of the short story The Vige by Nikolai Gogol? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing The Vige right, but I think I know the answer to this. Okay, so challenge is 1960, right? So it's out of scope for the horror movie syllabus. We do what we call modern horror, which is 1970 and on, which is not terribly modern, admittedly, but that it works. And go watch the introduction video. I explain it a little bit better there. But 1960 is out of scope of that. But for certain movies, some of the big classic horror movies, some of them I've even covered that are pre-1970. Some of them I will cover, but I also have a working knowledge of that, right? I'm Professor Victor. I'm supposed to know horror stuff. And I think I know this. And I've got the big clue is it's Italian, right? So here's the thing. I'm pretty sure we're not talking about giallo stuff. And my guess is not that. So that's my clue to use. I don't think that we're talking about giallo stuff because the title of the book rings a bell. And that's why I think I've got this, and it's not. And I'm pretty sure it's not giallo. And I hope I'm not wrong because I'm going to be really embarrassed. I'll leave it in. If I'm wrong about that, I will leave it in. You'll know. But I don't think I'm wrong. But that's my clue to you guys. And I think this movie is a pretty well known, at least amongst horror fans, a pretty well known movie. So that's all I'm going to say before I make my guess. So go ahead and lock in your guess. Time to wrap it up and lock it in. And so I'm going to go ahead and answer the question now. So my guess, it's a guess. I'm going to be honest with you. It's a guess. Is Black Sunday. I think it's Black Sunday, but let's check the card. Card says Black Sunday, 1960. I got that. Okay, I wasn't too sure about that one. I was a little on the limb, out on a limb with that one. So I'm pretty proud of myself on that. But yeah, I was pretty sure it wasn't going to be a giallo. I had a feeling that it was something a little bit more on the supernatural tip, and so I'm glad I got that one. Did you guys get it right? Because again, Black Sunday pretty well known amongst horror fans, and will we talk about that in the future? Maybe. That's a little hint for another time. I'm going to go ahead and call this video now. Thank you very much for hanging out to the end. Thank you to Paula for giving us this awesome recommendation. Sorry I didn't make the cut, but it's still a really good watch. So check it out if you get a chance. And I'm going to go ahead and say until next week, we'll do something completely different. But until then, we'll just say, class dismissed.